Waninakan, Nitampa Kanatawama. Good evening, friends and family. Hope you all are doing stellar. It's Neesu Wushuwunoag, Director General of the Federation of Aboriginal Nations of America. I do hope that this communication finds you all doing well. Wanted to take some time just to share some more thoughts about something that I think is a relevant topic, especially I've been seeing online lately. A lot more interest in social media platforms in terms of people wanting to know how to do more research, and as they're coming into research, seeing that they were misclassified, coming to the next natural question, well, how did this happen? And of course, the short answer is colonialism, right? They colonized us, but how did they do that? So I want to touch base tonight. It's going to be a very high level discussion, but just to orient a little bit more based upon the understandings that we've come to through our experiences as FANA, working collectively as different nations to address problems that we kind of all are facing in different ways. So I'll title this discussion tonight, Learning How to Navigate a Colonial System. And this is going to be specified to here in the U.S., from the interactions we've had with it and the history we've had with it. I don't know if it'll be specifically like every single element of it applicable to other places, but we can speak to our experience here, and hopefully this will orient you a little bit in terms of the experience that your people have, and how you can potentially start to address it if you've done all of these steps that I'm going to share next. So first thing I want to discuss about navigating the colonial system here in the U.S. is that you have to understand that it's commercial, right? So it's based upon things that have value. So land, property, all of these sorts of things, which is why, why there were wars in the manner that they were, to control the land, to control the resources, to control all of these things. And they did it through treaties and things of that nature. So having something that was giving them lawful permission to be able to do the things that they were doing, and then through that, kind of moving in the manner that they did. So the first thing to understand is that it's commercial, and anytime you're engaging with this system, you're engaging with it from a commercial perspective. And that'll become more apparent as I go through the rest of the steps. But understand that it's commercial. Colonialism is a commercial system. At least for what we're dealing with right now in the U.S., it's a commercial system, and it's tied to land, it's tied to resources, mineral rights, all of these different things that are of value. So when you control those things, then you have more power from a commercial perspective. So understand that this system of colonization that we're dealing with, it's a commercial system. That's the first thing. The second thing is that it deals with contracts and claims. And that's very, very key to understand, because when you understand that it's dealing with that and that it's commercial, well, then it makes sense when Columbus or any of those conquistadors come off the boat, throw the flag in the ground and say, I claim this land in the name of Queen such and such, King such and such. They're making a commercial claim against those lands. And that's why they say that they were undiscovered, because they're dealing in a commercial system. And in that commercial system, no one has acknowledged those lands be prior to them. So they're saying we discovered it commercially, and we're making a claim to it commercially. And they did it in front of all of our ancestors and all of that sort of stuff, right? So they viewed it as the ancestors didn't rebut their claim. Therefore, the claim stands as fact and law. And that's the thing, right? That's the thing. That's what's so key about the understanding that they're dealing with claims and contracts in a commercial system. It is almost the exact opposite of how we've been taught to think. We've been taught to think about ourselves as being innocent until proven guilty. But in a commercial system where they're dealing with claims, it's pretty much like you're guilty until proven innocent. If they make a claim against you, it's your responsibility to rebut that claim. And if you don't rebut that claim properly, it's going to stand as it is. So when they say that we're savages and we don't rebut it properly, it stands as it is. When they say that these lands are theirs and we don't rebut it properly, then it is what it is. It's theirs. By law. By law. By law it is. And the best piece of advice that I've ever received in terms of viewing the law is that to look at the law for what it is. Not that it's either right or wrong, but simply it's the law. It's what everyone's agreed to, or it's what everyone understands at this point right now written down. So when you understand that it's commercial and dealing with claims and contracts, then you understand that you have to deal with it commercially, which means you have to look at the things that have been said and be able to rebut them appropriately and correctly. So it's dealing with claims, but it's also dealing with contracts, and that's what treaties are. Treaties are contracts. Contracts to be able to use the lands. Contracts to be able to be have access to things. And here in the Northeast, what happened was these treaties were made and then they were broken. And when we tried to call them up on the fact that they broke the treaties, that's when the wars started erupting and things of that nature. So when you understand colonialism and colonization, it's commercial, but it's also dealing with claims and contracts. So treaties, giving them rights to be here in the eyes of the law, and then claims, what they're saying is theirs based upon their interaction with the commercial system that we're dealing with. So commercial, and it's also dealing with contracts and claims. The third element that you should be aware of is that it's dealing with legalese, which is different than the everyday sort of common language that you and I are speaking to with each other. Legalese, and what's very tricky about legalese is it will use the same words that we use in the common language, but then in a legal definition, the word will mean something totally different. Totally, absolutely different. Or it'll have certain nuances to it. Or it'll have certain things that are associated with it, certain perspectives on it, that you need to understand if you're going to walk into a court of law and try to argue anything. Especially if you're going to try to rebut their claims and things of that nature. So they're dealing with legalese, so you need to understand what legalese means and what the definitions are in legalese. For example, we know that in common language, an Indian is someone from India, right? From the country India, the nation India. But when you look at the legal definition, an Indian is an aboriginal inhabitant of North America or South America at the time of discovery by Columbus. So if you go into court and call yourself an Indian, you're going to be saying that. But if I'm talking to me and you just regular and I say that I'm Indian, then your first thought is going to be to go over to India, across the seas. So perfect example of legalese. The legal definition is substantially different from the common or historical definition that we're used to dealing with. And you need to understand that if you're going to be able to navigate this system, because when it comes to making claims, then when you interact with law enforcement, when you interact with a court system, you're going based off the legal definitions. And what is the legal definition and ramifications of you saying you're black, African American, white, Latino, Hispanic, colored, Negro? What are the legal definitions and ramifications of you agreeing to the fact that that's what you are by making that claim? Agreeing to contract with them when you deal with the law enforcement officer, because that's ultimately what it is, a contract, or an offer to contract with you. And then what is the claim that you're making as you engage in that contract with him? So it's commercial, it's dealing with contracts and claims, and they're using legalese. And you have to be very aware of all of these things every time you engage with it. The fourth element, I just wrote down some quick notes on it, is that it deals with substantiation. And this is why we say that you have to know who you are, right? You have to, because you can understand this commercial, you can make the proper claims and point to contracts and all that, like treaties and all that. You can use the proper legalese, but if you can't substantiate that what you're saying specifically applies to you, then it's all for naught. It's all for naught. If you can argue that the Cherokee went on the Trail of Tears, and you can argue that the Cherokee lands were taken, but if you can't prove that you're Cherokee, then who cares? Who cares? That's literally how the legal system sees it. And a lot of times, one of the issues is that we go in dealing with the legal system with a lot of emotion and passion, because of the hurt and the atrocities that have been visited upon us. But then it throws us off because this system doesn't care about those sorts of things. They care about the fact that it's a commercial system that's dealing with claims and contracts and that uses particular legalese. So you need to go into the situation not looking for the court to be kind to you, to be understanding to you, but to understand exactly what you're dealing with. A commercial system based upon claims and contracts that uses legalese, which is why you'll hear us say that we are American Aborigine, because when you look at what that term means, it is an Aboriginal inhabitant of this place called America. But then we'd like to take it a step further now, and we've actually enhanced our conversation. We're telling now we're Aboriginal inhabitants. We're inhabitants that are Aboriginal to these lands. So we're here. We're here now, and we've been here. So we're not coming from anywhere. So each of these things are claims that we're making as the officer or as the court attempts to contract with us. And based upon the claims that we're making and our ability to substantiate those claims, they will be bound by certain restrictions or obligations when it comes to contracting with us in whatever form or fashion they might be. A parking ticket, a speeding ticket. These are all contracts. So it's all about what claim you're making when you engage in those contracts and how you substantiated those contracts. And this is why claiming to be things like Hebrew Israelites is a very sticky situation, because all of the history, let's entertain all of the history and all of the evidence and all of the theories that are being proposed about Hebrew Israelites being over here, because we know there's a large number of individuals who look a lot like you and I, who are claiming to be Hebrew Israelite, and they point to the Bible and they point to curses and they point to experiences and all that. But the question is going to remain, but how do you prove specifically that you're a Hebrew Israelite? It's great that you think all of that is happening, but that's all going to be considered like ancillary evidence. It's going to be considered secondary. It's not going to be considered circumstantial evidence in the eyes of the court. What does that have to do with you? How do you prove that you're a Hebrew Israelite? And if you can't prove you're a Hebrew Israelite, then you do yourself no justice putting it down on paper anywhere in a claim form. The more proper process would be to find what nation you come from and then show that that nation comes from the Hebrew Israelites. If you can do that, we aren't aware of any way to do that. But that would be the proper way to go about doing that. First, showing who you are, and then showing how that is connected to Hebrew Israelites. Because if you just make the claim that you're a Hebrew Israelite, once again, how are you substantiating that through a direct connection to you? So substantiation is so key, because it's gonna give you the legitimacy to make every and any other claim that you're making. When we say that we're pre-colonial American Aborigine tribes and nations, the history, the bloodlines, the genealogy, everything substantiates that claim. So we can make it, and because we can make that claim, it leads to my last point that you should be aware of when you're dealing with a colonial system, is standing. Because you have to have standing in order to make certain arguments, especially when you're talking treaties. Treaties are between nations and nations. So you can't, as an individual who's a citizen of something, go in to argue about treaty rights. Your nation has to argue those treaty rights on your behalf. And you as a citizen can't go in and argue treaty rights against your own nation. So with the Snyder Act, Snyder Act of 1924, as I touched upon in the past, with it making all Indians born within the territorial jurisdictions of the U.S. So if you have a state birth certificate, you're within the territorial jurisdiction of the U.S. If you have, social security numbers, driver's license, all of these things that they give out to citizens, voted, any of that, you're considered within the territorial limits, but mainly with the birth certificate. Because if you're born there, if you were given a birth certificate upon birth, then you're considered born within the territorial limits of the U.S. You are considered a U.S. citizen. This is why you can't go arguing treaty rights. This is why we continually stress the importance of tribal trust, because it's the only way to separate you in your proper status and standing to be able to argue nation to nation about what treaties or rights you may have. You can have everything in advance, everything. The commercial aspect down, understanding how the whole process works, right? Getting your claims correct when you go in to contract with these people or to offer contract with them. Use all the right legalese, right? But if you don't substantiate that you have that connection to you, and beyond that, ensure that you're in the proper standing, then you're going to lose every time, and you're going to lose that standing. They're going to say you don't have the stand. Everything's correct, but you don't have the standing to make that argument. You don't have the standing. And it's rough because if you don't understand the standing aspect of it, then you can almost feel totally defeated when you lose and understand that everything you did was right. So what do they mean? What do they mean? Well, they mean that their system goes deep. And they mean that their system has been being perfected for several different centuries now. And it's still going on. They're working on it every single day, especially with all of the craziness that's going on, to put us in more of a lockdown and a chokehold. Says it's all, like I said at the end of the day, commercial. It's about controlling these lands and the resources that they represent. So, just to recap, in navigating this colonial system here in the U.S., can't speak to anywhere else, but here in the U.S., in navigating this colonial system, just 5 things to keep in mind. First of all, that is commercial. It's strictly commercial when you're dealing. It does not care about your feelings. It does not care about your history. It's commercial. It's about the dollars. It's about the land. It's about the resources and the value that each of them represents and the power that it gives to whoever controls it. So it's commercial. It's dealing with contracts and claims. And based upon what your claim is or what their claim is against you, when you contract with them, you're going to be either doing better than them or doing a lot worse than them. And this is why it's so necessary to understand what claims you're making with the terminology that you're using, which brings me to 3, legalese. It's a system using legalese, the legal definitions of things, not the common definitions, not the historical definitions, not the moral or ethical definitions. Remember, it's just the law. It's not right or wrong. It's just the law. And a lot of times, as we saw with slavery in the past, the moral morality and the ethics aren't even necessarily playing a role until the law gets changed. The morality and the ethics are what motivate people to change the law, but the law is just the law. And if you don't understand that, you're going to be very frustrated with it and not be taking the proper steps to address it. So it's using legalese. It deals with substantiation, so any claim that you make, especially if you're tying it into a contract, you better make sure you can substantiate that claim, that that's who you actually are, that's what you have the right to claim. And then lastly, it deals with standing. So you can have everything right, like I said, with American Indians having birth certificates here in the U.S., you can have everything right. You can understand this commercial and how it works. You can have your claim correct and contract and have all the treaties and all that with you. You can use the proper legalese. You can substantiate everything. But if you don't understand what your status is, then you won't have standing when you go in to make the arguments. You could be totally correct, 100% correct, and you won't have the standing when you go in to make the arguments. And all that should tell you is that this system is deep. So we encourage you, family, before you get into anything, make sure you know who you are. Point blank, most important first step if you're dealing with trying to come out of this colonial system, and that's why we're talking tonight, navigating the colonial system, trying to come out of this colonial system, you have to first know who you are so that when you step into this process of undoing it, you don't trip yourself up. Because you trip yourself up in even one place, any of those steps along that line, and I'm sure there could be more. It can go much more in depth. You can do studies on all of those points and break them down even further. Those are just very high level sort of understandings for you to just get at least what our experiences are being, what our understanding of it is. But if you trip up on any of those, then your claim is not going to be a valid one, and you're not going to win the argument. You won't. You won't win the argument. So hope that is of assistance, family. Hope that's helping you in your own personal journeys. Hope that your weekend is ending well, that your Gregorian calendar work week is getting ready to start off in a positive note. And Aquani Kapishkanash, peace be unto you. And we do hope to see you soon. I hope.